right. Thanks everyone for coming. This is a panel about writing for the conversation. I'm Meredith Cole. I'm in the Office of the Vice President for Research, and we're just really delighted to have the conversation editors here with us and also some UVA faculty who have taken advantage of this great opportunity and have written several times for the conversation. So let me just introduce everybody. Laurie Archbald-Pannone is an associate professor of medicine and geriatrics. Naomi Cahn is a professor of law, and A.D. Carson is an assistant professor of hip hop. Also with us is Howard Manley. He's the race and equity editor on the politics and society desk. And Michelle McAdams is the editor and university relationship manager for the conversation. And I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, who will be moderating. Thanks, Michelle.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Meredith. And thanks to everyone for joining. My first question, and I should just mention too, I have a list of questions to ask the panelists, but we'll also have time at the end for your questions. So if you have a question you want to submit now, please feel free to put it in the chat, which we'll be monitoring later. Or you can also just raise your hand when the time comes at the end. So my first question is for you, Howard. Can you talk a little bit about what writing, what the conversation is generally looking for when it comes to stories? What kinds of pieces do we publish, and what makes us different from traditional news organizations?
Thanks, Michelle. And I want to thanks Meredith for organizing this. And I want to acknowledge the tragedy when I think of those folks have been shot, and you think of the poor mothers that did all they could to get their kid to come to UVA. That's sort of an amazing thing, and to have that snapped out like that is just a tragedy. I will say from the outset that I live in Newport News, Virginia, so I am partial to all UVA pitches. I will tell you that right off the bat. So you have a welcome home here with me. The conversation in general tries to match and marry and weld together the expertise and scholarship that you guys have with creating accessibility, more public access for the stories that you write. So we sort of translate those stories to make them timely, relevant, and punchier for the most part. The stories that we're generally looking for, I mean, we can always do stories on the president getting another investigation, but we want other kinds of stories that tell us something that we don't know. And with your expertise and your passion for that, it should come out in terms of interest and relevance. So having said that, there's a wide range of what stories are. So when you look at the conversations masthead, you'll see a health and science editor, you'll see a race and equity editor, you'll see a politics editor, you'll see a religion editor, and all those different editors need stories that come under their purview. So if you had a story in health, for example, Amanda, who we can all, and your comms people will help you with this, is direct you directly with that person where that story may play. There's some overlap. If you were to take a look at, say, the impact of the overturning of Roe versus Wade on Black women, I may do that story. So the main thing is to get the story ideas coming and getting them to the appropriate hands, and then we can sort of go from there. A special shout out for AD, because he's done it 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 30 times now. He's like an expert. He knows how to maneuver within, and I will just say this, pay attention to the writing. You're already an expert in your field, but tell us a story. Don't let the data and all that support it, but tell us a story. And AD is very good at that. Is very good at that. So any questions I can answer after this, but I just wanted to say that to get us started.
Thanks so much, Howard. My next question is for all of the faculty panelists. How did you first learn about the conversation, and what made you want to write for us? AD, can I ask you to go first?
Yes, of course. And thank you so much, Howard. Thanks everybody for organizing here. When I was when I was in my doctoral program down at Clemson, there was a lot of stuff going on campus. I mean, like the things that folks call complex history, which don't really seem that complex, like, racism, enslavement, all of these stories that institutions like the one that we are at and others tend to not want to share as I guess like as readily as the other kinds of things that they share. And so I'd been doing some writing for other places, trying to make sure that the work that I do, which is about a lot of things, but through hip hop and hip hop inspired art, particularly rap music. And after the tragedy that happened at the Mother Emanuel Church, a friend of mine who is a journalist and also a scholar who was there at Clemson, we went from Clemson to Charleston, and he was getting requests to do quite a bit of stuff. And so he introduced me to the first editor that I worked with at The Conversation, because I'd written something about the history. I mean, if you've ever been to Charleston, you'll see that there's like a tall statue of John Calhoun just a block away from the church.
Yep.
And so like I'm fixated on that, but also thinking about how this church is kind of in the shadow of that monument, and then thinking about the legacy of John Calhoun in a place like Charleston and in a place like Clemson, where the Honors College was named after him, and the main building was named, or is currently still named, after Pitchfork Ben Tillman. And so what I ultimately wrote that first time was about how these monuments and these symbols might pretend something greater for our engagements with the world, especially as we are dealing with these tragedies and we look at them as isolated incidents, as opposed to being situated within these histories that are memorialized with statues of people like John Calhoun. So that was I think I was in my third year there. And that was the first thing that I wrote. And so I've always looked at The Conversation as a place that I might be able to go back and just like and pitch something. And Howard will tell you that it's always something that that ties back to music, that I want to try to get people to think about hip hop more deeply. And also, I guess like a really important note is I don't believe that scholarship like hip hop in the academy should exist in a way that is not accessible to people. It should always be something that is looking at the audiences from which the culture originates and where it's situated, rather than being something that is isolated to the ivory tower. And so I find myself trying to write more about hip hop publicly, and to try to make that work as accessible as I possibly can, rather than prioritizing going to a peer-reviewed journal or any of those other kinds of places where it might be harder to have access to that for the populations that are most concerned and or affected by the implications of all these things that we want to say about hip hop.
Thank you so much, AD. Laurie, how about you? When did you learn about The Conversation, and why did you want to write?
Yeah, so I first heard about The Conversation a couple years back, maybe is in 2019, and there was a workshop about sharing voices that aren't often shared within op-eds, and getting more diversity in media and in press, and then ultimately in history. And I was wanting to be a part of that, and started talking with the health editor at The Conversation. And my first piece was on, so as a geriatrician, I see patients that are over 65 in both the primary care practice as well as consultation. And so one of the big things that we always talk about is medications. And so patients that are on a lot of medications, polypharmacy. And so we had written academically about polypharmacy, but I was having the same conversation over and over again with a lot of my patients. And to be able to get that word out more broadly, we were able to put together a piece on polypharmacy, which was very well received. And that came out, I think it was like March 7th, 2020. So timing wise, you can imagine that as a geriatrician, there was a lot that then started happening through 2020. And so having already established that experience with the conversation and having a piece that was well received from many different avenues, I found myself every time I was learning something new about COVID and telling my patients over and over again about it, to pivot that into a piece. So when we were starting to talk about social distancing, pivoting that to a piece, what's social distancing versus social isolation? When we were starting to talk about, telemedicine, what does that mean for, people in the community? So we were writing about it academically. Let's talk about it, with everyone as well. Same with vaccinations. Once vaccinations came out, being able to really have that conversation in a more broader place is really one of the ways the conversation has been a great resource. And it's to the point now where sometimes my patients will come in and say, hey, I think that you should maybe write about this because, I've been telling my friends that you said this and nobody else, is talking about it. So, so sometimes that's a great idea. I've been said that to 4 people this morning already. So let's elevate that conversation more broadly. So that's really how I got involved with the conversation and kind of how I approach thinking about it now. I think it's a great way to expand the knowledge and the conversations that we can have one-on-one with our patients as a physician, to be able to have that more broadly with the public overall, certainly not giving specific medical advice, but being able to say, these are the types of things you should be talking to your doctor about, or these are the types of things you should be thinking about in a way that is focused on older adults, caregivers for older adults, and a lot of the populations that are especially vulnerable during the pandemic, both socially and medically, as well as really just overall in healthcare. So it's been a great way to be able to reach more people.
Thanks so much, Laurie. I love that your patients are sharing story ideas. That's amazing. Or encouraging you to write their story ideas. Naomi, how about you?
I have a slightly different story. It was actually somewhat happenstance. Our first, and I realized I think I've done 7 or 8 pieces.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you.
Over the past, I don't know, maybe 2 years or so. And our first piece was, we wrote an op-ed, and as we were talking to our communications people about where we might pitch it, the conversation came up. And so we thought, oh, that would be wonderful. So we pitched it to the conversation, which then said to us, we don't publish op-ed.
I know that's right.
But they said, but we're interested in the topic.
Yes.
So we ditched the op-ed. I don't know where it is now. And we completely rewrote a piece, working very closely with an editor. And I don't know if someone from the conversation is going to talk about the nitty gritty of the process.
We will, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, we were given a brief topic to write about, and we then started from scratch. And I'm just looking at the article, and I love how the article turned out, but it was a very different process. Then after that, I think I got on the conversation radar, and I was asked to write a few pieces, and then I've pitched a few. We'll talk more about pitches later, but I loved that experience so much because it's a great outlet, and we wrote something working with the conversation that, dare I say, was much better than what I would have originally written on our own.
Thank you. If I could just add here and take it forward about the nitty gritty of the process, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And so we have a rule on the op-ed stuff, and that's, self-explanatory. But what we do is publish the data, the facts, and let people conclude what they want to conclude. All right. So in one of our stories, and this is why I was a little bit talking about the writing, if you just separate yourself from what your actual job is, but just the writing of a newspaper story, it's challenging to jam all that stuff up into 800 words. Be clear and explain the background and give an example. But that's what we do. And that's the beauty of all of this. Back when I was a reporter, I would run up with a mic to a professor and say, hey, what do you think about this? And you get the quote, maybe, but it'll be much better if the professor actually wrote the story. So having said that, 800 words is basically 4 200-word sections, right? The first 200 has got to be telling me something new, something off of the news, or an interesting gambit, you know. So for example, I got a story right now about Ulysses S. Grant. He's going to be, he's up for a promotion to be the General Army guy. It's like only him, John Pershing, and then George Washington, right? But what is forgotten about him is that he had an extremely extraordinary civil rights legacy right after the war. You didn't know that about him. So that's your first 200 words. Your next 200 words is your global, this is what this means. And this is why I'm writing about it, because I'm a hip hop professor. I'm an expert in geriatrics. So you write that paragraph. Your third section, about 200 words. And again, give or take 50. I'll let you in on a secret. You know, some stories are longer than 800 words. So your third section is your discussion. Well, what do the opponents say about this? What is how did we get to this research? Just a discussion of the point that you're making. The last section is, and this is where you go back to the Black church and you hear the preacher. This is your bring it on home section. What's my last takeaway, right? What is that last quote? What's the point? What's the spin? Where do I go? That last section has got to answer that question that you talk to your patients or your cousin at the barbecue, right? So it doesn't always work out that way. AD is a poet, and we got to rein him in a little bit with all the stuff that he and you try to, but what you try to do is incorporate that sense, that feeling into some words that are tangible and won't leave people guessing. Clarity. Say what you mean what you say. Back it up. Say what you mean what you say, back it up. And backing up is the data, the quotes, the actions, right? So with that's sort of the formula, and that works for, you can flip that to an op-ed, right? And the difference would be, you have the word, this should happen, or this, whatever opinion you may have. But for all newspapers, they're all the same format. And so it works out pretty well. And again, for me, it's fun to get that copy and to work with it. And that's the greatest compliment that you can make, is that we made it better. And I'm sure and we got a hell of a lot of good editors here, a lot of good editors.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Naomi. So the editing process, you've each written multiple pieces for the conversation. I'd love to hear more about what the process was like for you, especially first time around, especially working with different editors. Have there been any surprises, good or bad, or challenges? And Naomi, you brought this up earlier, so can I call on you to go first?
Sure. I will say when I did my first piece, the biggest surprise was just how much editing our editor did and how involved in the editing process our editor was. And we're law professors, so we write for law journals, and we're used to having law review editors ask us to footnote things like the sun was shining on a particular day, right? But this is very different. This is making sure that every single statement that we are saying is accurate. And it's also helping us shape it in a way that, as I said, improves it. Although it can be frustrating after the fourth or fifth draft.
Oops.
Sorry. But ultimately you get to a place. And so, I mean, it's an incredibly intensive and ultimately wonderful editing process. I'll also say that the editing process does vary depending on the article. And so, I mean, in some cases it has been a 1 or 2 week editing process. I've done a few on our post-Dobbs world, and that's kind of a constantly changing situation. And so it's taken a couple of weeks to get things right. But there are others that have proceeded far more quickly. So it's the editing process varies, but I think the big surprise was just how intensive it was and how involved our editor was. And so if very, very different from an op-ed process where you just sort of like submit something and then the next time you see it, you might have a few word changes. This was almost, in many ways, it felt quite wonderfully collaborative. I mean, everything that ever appears is still our views.
Yeah.
It's just that it has been crafted in a way to make it something, it's always just far more readable.
Yeah. And you're right, it depends. I mean, there's some stories that we can move out in a couple hours, no matter what, you know, that's what we're trained to do. If it's breaking, we can do it that way. Other stories, there's a lot of variables. There's other stories that you're working on. There's a degree of difficulty to what was submitted and what we all have to sort of work through. Some stories are looking for a peg, you know, and then there's the going back and forth. But no, it's a challenge, not only to make sure that you don't lose people. So things you take for granted, folks may not know. So, for example, if you were to just say the Emancipation Proclamation, yes, there are some people. So just 4 or 5 words to explain what that was goes a long way to just making sure everybody understands where we are. And whenever you're talking about medicine in any Latin term, that's another paragraph. I can tell you that much right now. So instead of saying cardio infarctum, you would just say heart attack, okay?
Yep. And if I could piggyback on that, I think, you know, working with the editors it's smooth and it's wonderful to kind of see what evolves, but it's also great to have that voice in the process, to still have the same, you know, voice that you want to convey throughout the article as well. And the presentation, I really enjoy working with the editors, even in terms of kind of what picture is associated with the article, especially early in COVID when we were talking about, you know, getting tested and working with your physician. And a lot of the stock pictures did not have masks on, which was not kind of what we wanted to model in the press. And so being able to go through and really say, you know, this doesn't really fit what we're trying to say. This perhaps represents our perspective a little bit better. And being able to be part of that process is also something I've really enjoyed working with the conversation.
And then you learn that there's little things within a story. There's games within the story. So like your subheads, for example, those are potential weapons to sort of shape the way folks think about the next section, right? So even if you have people just skimming the story, they get a sense for, so those little things, and the art is always important. You want dramatic art. But like I say, it's a production, it's a collaboration. I can remember AD and I on the phone going over words at the last minute, you know, just making sure we got it right. And it's important, I know for us, as a writer, you don't want to take away someone's voice, and nor do I want to put my voice into a story. So there's a fine line in there that ultimately you rest on, because you have to approve it. So like I said, it's an enjoyable process. It really, really is.
And I prefer to, I mean, you know, like there are times where it feels like a struggle. I prefer to see it as a dance. Because you know, like that's just it, because at the end, of course, like our aim is the same. Like we want to get the information out there, and we want to make sure that folks are able to engage with it. But I am, you know, circumloquacious.
There it is. See, got to take that word out right there. See, there it is right there. We've talked about this.
Yeah, like I love to talk around the point, you know, and then like sort of spiral in and then like get to it eventually. And it's like, no, it's the journey as well as the destination. And Howard is like, no. We need a snapshot, you know, like let's just get there.
Get there, Doc. Yeah.
So I certainly do appreciate it. And you know, and I do find myself, you know, holding on to versions of things because of the reality that sometimes the way that you want to, I mean, the thing that you want to say is important, but the way that you want to say it might be something that you do something else with. And so I'm always aware of that as well, that you know, it is that I'm writing for this platform, for these audiences, and there might be other audiences who want to hear different versions of it. There are other audiences who want to know, well, AD, what do you think about this? Like, what is the, you know, like, what are we supposed to do? And so like those are things that I'm aware of as well. And it also just like many times it leads to other opportunities to be able to expand on the conversation that you're having. People have been asking over and over and over, you know, these past few weeks about the prevalence of, you know, rappers dying violently, rappers being killed. And of course, the reason that folks are asking that question is because of the most recent time that has happened, and connecting that to the previous times that it's happened. And my pushback has always been that there's this American thing that is going on with gun violence that rappers are caught up in. And the important thing for me is to try to reframe that so that we can have more context and talk about it as an American problem and not a rapper problem, or as both a rapper problem and an American problem, as opposed to the very limited way that folks are talking. And so this has just led to more opportunities to have that conversation framed in a way that I feel is more responsible.
Thanks, everyone. Howard, my next question is for you. As the race and equity editor on our Politics and Society desk, what kinds of stories are you most interested in pursuing? What most piques your interest when you're going through pitches? And I know I've already asked multiple, but maybe you could talk a little bit too about pitches versus
Okay.
too.
All right, I'll start with the pitches. The pitches, they come across, we review every last one of them. A lot of times, the peg is not quite right, but what we honestly do is go back to that professor and say, how about this? Based on that pitch, how about this? And then we can start the commission process going. And it's usually just narrowing the focus a little bit, but all the information is there. So that's one way. What I'm looking for, again, is something that I did not know. Right. So we've written and seen thousands of stories about the 14th Amendment, but how is that playing out right now? That would be something interesting, and how that's at the basis of some of the decisions that Clarence Thomas has been writing, whatever it is, right? Something you didn't know, something that's interesting to you, right? So that will come across in what you choose to write about and how you use the words within that story to convey that point, right? But yeah, I mean, it's just, and it's anything. For example, I was at a news meeting just the other day, I think Michelle was there, and I had been cleaning out my closet and I came across a whole stack of business cards. I'm just not going to say that I'm an older gentleman, but I loved business cards. That was gold back in the day. So we have a team of folks, and one of your colleagues, Michelle Hanna, found a scholar who studies human resource management, social interaction at a workplace, and he's at the University of Virginia. And so I've reached out to him. I'm trying to get him to do a story. So it's things like that, like how we live kinds of stories that may have a racial element to it. But those are the kinds of things. It's just a range. And back, like I said, I'm an old newspaper guy. The question was always, what is news? It's whatever your editor tells you news is. So there's a lot of that. There's always news, so you can always take a story and make it a news story, but we need the material to work with first. So, yeah.
Thanks.
But pitches, you can and different editors work different ways. You can always call me up or send me an email and say, hey, I got this idea about this. And we still officially record it, when we actually commission the story, but there's a lot of ways to gain entry point for you guys at University of Virginia, given that I live in Virginia and I love Virginia, and I need some University of Virginia Cavalier jerseys. I need all that stuff, tennis shoes, law book, anything.
Howard, should people hold off on writing before they hear from you if they've sent in a pitch? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, Naomi brought this up. If you've already done a piece, you're already locked into that. So then we're going to have to ask you to rewrite the whole thing, right? And that is okay the first time, but it gets kind of old the second and third time. So one of the things before I commission is I get you to write like 2 or 3 sentences summarizing what you want to write right now in real time. What is the piece you want to write, right? And then do it in 2 or 3 sentences. I'll send you the commission, and then bang, you're on the platform, and you can submit anything at that point. You know, that's on you. But we got to take a look at it, and then we're going to go through the process. And like I say, as everybody knows, the process is rigorous. So once you get in, now it's on and popping. We're time to go. Time to roll here.
Thanks, Howard. My next question. So what have been
Oh, wait,
some?
I'm sorry, can I just go back to the
Yeah, of course.
to the pitch?
Yes.
Let me just say, I have pitched. It's wonderful that we have a friend in you.
Yes, I know.
No, that's something for all of. I mean, I don't know. You're going to be hearing from me. But I will just say I have done pitches and they're not always successful. And so
Yeah.
my advice would be that first, Howard, but second of all, if at first you don't succeed, just keep coming in with additional pitches,
Yeah.
because and I know we'll get to this, but the experience is so wonderful. And so, yeah, I mean, I would just encourage you, if you are thinking of something which would have a news angle to it, but which you want to delve into more deeply, to do a pitch and not to be discouraged.
Yeah.
I would echo that, you know, the worst you can hear is no, right? And we're fortunate here at UVA to have our, communications team. So sometimes I'll be talking with our communications team and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then they may say, oh, okay, well, I'll pitch this to the conversation, and then, kind of help that process along. So kind of saves me a step, so to speak. But if you have something to say it. Nobody wants to hear it, that's okay. You can go somewhere else, but it's worth sticking with it because something's gonna be okay.
I should also say I get told no a lot, and I'm fine with that. But I know that the stuff that I'm doing or that I'm trying to do feels unconventional in academia. It also feels unconventional in news, and sometimes like if you're trying to like get people to listen to music as academic knowledge, and that's just like, it's a new thing. It's not something that folks are even used to, and there are not a whole lot of platforms that are interested in that. And I know that I went back and forth quite a bit with the education editor writing a piece about a peer-reviewed rap album, because the album was peer-reviewed and released with the University of Michigan Press, and that had never been done before. And so, then if the question is, well, how do we write about this thing that hasn't been done before, and who's supposed to do that writing? Well, I'm the person who wrote the album. I'm not writing a review of the album. I'm actually writing about the process of publishing the album with an academic press. And so, I think that we have a space for what happens when a professor writes an article or writes a book. And that doesn't feel like this like gratuitous self-promotion, but like folks might look at that in that way because you've written a mixtape that is supposed to be the distillation of your research, because like folks just have perceptions about mixtapes and rappers that are different. And so even writing specifically about that, what are the perceptions of rappers as people? And that's a story that Howard and I have done 2 different versions of, because it plays out not just in research or the presentation of research. It plays out in the ways that people write about rappers whenever violence happens. It plays out in the ways that people write about violence when it happens, if they're using a descriptor of a person who might have done something awful, but also might have made rap music at some point in their life, as was the case in Highland Park.
Thank you all for sharing that insight. My next question is, what have been some of the benefits for you for writing, of writing with us? Whoever would like to start, please jump in.
I'll start. I think one of the neatest things with the conversation specifically is the author dashboard. So when you put an article out, we've talked about the process of, getting the topic and writing the article. And then once it's published, there's a wonderful author dashboard that you can go back to see the impact of your article, to see how many people have read your article, to see, where are people reading your article and where has it been, republished as well, which is useful as an academic, right? You can then take that back. It's not a, it's a piece of the whole picture of what you're doing, right? You're having impact, you're reaching a broader audience. And so then being able to use those metrics on the CV for, P&T process to be able to describe, what's the impact that this article has had. And often it'll lead to other opportunities as well, right? It'll lead to, interviews by, other news outlets. It'll lead to, podcast invitations, and it'll lead to other opportunities as well, because people have seen that. And being able to document the impact, I think, is one of the great things that the conversation does that's highly beneficial to us as academics, because we're able to not just say, oh, a lot of people liked my article, but we're able to say, 103,000 people read my article in 24 hours. It's wonderful to be able to have that metric and to be able to say that. And I think that's a great thing that the conversation does.
Thanks, Laurie. AD, Naomi? Who wants to-
Yeah, I think that, I agree with all of those things. And in addition to that, for me, it's really helpful. I think that it feels good sometimes to see the considerations change in the ways that other people write in response to reframing something, so that folks, try to be a little more responsible or a little more attentive. So even if someone is not directly, directly sharing something that I've written, to know that, like the hyperlink there is to the thing that was written, and the way that they're approaching talking about the story it's a subtle shift, but it's incredibly important, especially when lives are at stake.
I'll just add that it's wonderful, and I think this is less of an issue for my two co-panelists, but for me, it's wonderful to see what I'm talking about go out there into the world, into a way that is outside of law review articles. And so it's a wonderful way to translate that. And in turn, that feeds my scholarship, because it helps me see things in slightly different ways. It helps me frame things in different ways. So it's a sort of trying to get information out, trying to perhaps have some influence, trying to have some impact. And they're not op-eds, right? They're news, but trying to have some impact that way in terms of framing various stories. It's also led to, I did a piece on Britney Spears' guardianship, and the Atlanta Fed asked me to come do a panel on guardianship.
Wow.
So it's also led kind of more directly to various speaking engagements as people read things. I did another piece on fertility and donor conception. Canada just asked me to talk to them. So it's also been, the people who read either what is posted on the conversation website or one of the groups that looked to the conversation for purposes of its articles. It's incredible just how widely the articles you'll see on that dashboard just how many reads, how many people have read what you've done. Laurie talked about the importance of that dashboard, but that doesn't measure when it goes out to regional newspapers and people who read your piece through regional newspapers or through national newspapers or through I've been printed in Japanese newspapers, right? International newspapers as well. And so the impact is the conversation, which is then read by so many other people.
And I will also just point out, a resource that I've used is our comps team, again, to say, the next day they'll say, these are the places that it has been published also. And then being able to have that and being able to kind of see where has it gone is a neat tool also.
Everyone. I do have a couple more questions, but I just want to pause and see, Meredith, have any questions come in through the chat?
I haven't seen any yet. I did put up a note for people to put a question if they have one in the chat, and I'll let you know if any come through.
Sounds good. Thanks, Meredith. You all talked about this a little bit earlier, that like try again when it comes to pitching, which is wonderful advice. What other advice do you have for scholars considering pitching their work to us?
Voice is very different in the conversation than the voice we use for a lot of what we do as professionals. So we, may be experts in a example scientific field, and as we're writing about it for our peer review journals, we're writing about it with a specific lens, specific language, specific perspective, but being able to bring that to the, well, why does that matter, right? Why am I doing this? Who should care about this, and why does it matter? To be able to distill that into a different conversation that you can have in terms of, well, this matters more broadly because is a nice way to kind of translate academic work into, well, impactful work, right? Things that get out to the community more broadly. So I would say that thinking about the voice that you're approaching for a piece in the conversation is going to typically be a different voice than you would be using when you're writing for other things professionally.
And if I can make a suggestion, it's helpful to, regardless of the topic that you're writing about, is to go to our website and then search that topic. And that way you have a general sense of what we've done, if anything, on the particular topic that you want to write about. And you can take language from those stories and put them in your own words, and that makes a good pitch too. So just remember that. And also be aware that if there's, a major story, there's everybody, we'll get like 10 or 15 pitches on the same thing, maybe different angles, but on major stories, we're going to be swamped with folks, trying to write about that particular topic, whatever that is. But think about a different way that you had not seen. I think one of the guys that we had a conversation, he's left, he said, we don't write about hurricanes, but we will write about new technologies to measure those hurricanes. And that was always a good way to look at what the conversation does. It's just something underneath. We can do the hard breaking news story, but again, tell us something we didn't know that's kind of useful and relevant.
Along those lines, I think that one of the things that always comes up for me is thinking about multimedia, thinking about the ways that you might be able to. Like, for example, when I think Kanye West had said something about reading and compared it to eating Brussels sprouts. And well, I like reading and I like Brussels sprouts. However, the point wasn't to say that, that Kanye is wrong or I disagree with Kanye or anything like that. What we did is we did a playlist of rap music that refers to literature to provide some context so that people might be able to take Kanye's remarks, but also see how other rappers have looked at that, but also even the ways that some scholars have written about Kanye's music in reference to, its literary allusions. And so, we're really able to do a playlist of songs to kind of intervene in a conversation that is dominating the news cycle in a way that many of those stories have not approached it. So it was a way to be able to approach a story in a very different way and to bring other voices into that story. I think in pretty powerfully, and I think folks like me always want to share playlists. So.
Yeah, and even if even if the pitch is not accepted, your name is in the Rolodex. And so when a particular topic, especially if you have like a field of expertise, that we got a pitch the other day, the scholar is focused on the hats of the French Revolution that will be used during the Olympics. Right? So there's no need for us to do that story now, But now when we have a story for the Olympics, we're going to go back to that guy and get that story, because it'll be one of those things. You'll say things you didn't know about the French Olympics. And here's these hats, and this is what that means. So the pitch can also be used as sort of a, I am here and ready to go kind of thing as well. So we know that you're in there and you have this particular field of expertise and you're interested in writing for the conversation.
I actually had three tips, and two of them have already been said. Actually, all of them have been said, but it's, explain why it's important, see what else has been written, as Howard said, and then also don't write something in advance and then try to revise it, because the whole process is collaborative. But I'll also add that I think as I looked back, I think I've written two different types of articles. And so I think that you can pitch two different kinds. I mean, one is, as Laurie was talking about, what's going on during the pandemic, which may or may not relate to your scholarship. But I just did a piece for a law review on how the states that are the least hospitable for abortion access also happen to be the most unfriendly to families. Well, I was able to then do a pitch to the conversation about that. And so it was a way of, I mean, the research for both pieces fed on one another. And of course, they're different, but it was a way also of getting my scholarship into the conversation and then into other places. So, I mean, you can pitch different kinds of stories. You can pitch sort of what's going on in the news, and you can also pitch, at least my experience is based on the scholarship that you're doing. As long as you have some kind of a tie-in to current news, and it's almost always easy to find that.
Yes.
The Olympics, right, a few years, but yeah, I mean, you can almost always find some tie-in.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's always an upcoming event or anniversary or other milestone that can create that news peg. My last question, you are all so busy. Why is engaging with the public, taking time to write for a general audience important to each of you?
Well, I'll say because I'm passionate about what I do, and I think what I do is important and has impact on people, and as many people I can share that with is what I want to do, and the conversation is a great tool to do that, and it's fun in the process as well.
Thanks, Laurie.
Yeah, I think that I'll say that, well, yeah, like hip hop is one of America's, biggest cultural exports. Like this is something that a lot of people are dealing with, and maybe not even aware that they're dealing with it, or they're dealing with ramifications of it, or metaphors that persist or exist because of it, or like that exist in response to it or in dialogue with it. And as I said before, the monopoly on scholarship and or conversations about hip hop should not be held by universities or folks at universities. And therefore, it's just really important for me, and maybe the priority is to engage in what I guess folks might call public research, but just in conversation with as broad an audience as possible.
Yeah, I've already talked about how wonderful it is to have such a broad audience. I mean, it's the conversation, but the conversation is read around the world, and the stories are picked up. And there's nothing like, I mean, I also, because of some of the topics I write about, I've had people write me about things like, well, gee, how do I help someone who's under a guardianship get out of the guardianship? Or what do I do if my fertility clinic has not lived up to its promises? And so it's engaging both with the public, and then it's also trying to, other media often will call you as a result. And yeah, we like the ideas that we're thinking about, and it's wonderful to have, it's wonderful to get reactions from other people. It's also that there's a comment feature on the conversation as well. And sometimes the comments are really, really, really thoughtful and useful. And so it also gives you good feedback to what it is that you're thinking about. And then, I should also say, this is not just about engaging with the public, but I think it's improved my writing. So thank you, the conversation.
And I will say that, and I don't want to say this lightly, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, but these are extraordinary times, especially over the last 6 years. And one of the things that's at stake is this idea of an informed citizenry and the functioning of democracy. And so you see a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and in some cases, just out and out lies that need to be corrected. And so, as long as I'm at the conference, we're going to do everything we can to get that. It won't be on the conversation that you didn't know that COVID was bad. I mean, come on now.
Thanks, everyone. Meredith, did you have a question? Oh, Naomi. Meredith, did any questions come in?
No questions.
Is there?
Did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Oh, I just those were all my questions, but I'm sure I missed something. So Howard, any of the panelists, anything I didn't ask that you'd like to share?
Want to hear ideas? The sooner the better. And the other thing is, I mean, I don't know your schedule in terms of like the finals, and then you're off for the holidays for a couple of weeks. And so it's a good time to sort of pitch some stories now, because we're looking for stories over this next couple of months. And if we get them in now, we can sort of get them edited and run them a little later on. So it's a real slow period for everybody, but we're still ready for you.
And I put a link to the VPR's website. We have a page about writing for the conversation. Michelle, did you have a link that you would share with people who were interested in pitching as well?
Absolutely. Yep, I can share that.
It's easily available on the conversation website as well. I wondered if from the conversation side, you might want to talk more about, you've talked about the pitches and working with us. It sounds like there's a daily editorial meeting where you talk through pitches. Is that?
Well, no, we have a daily news meeting of stories that are running that next day.
Got
the
it.
pitch discussions happen within desk. So we get, say 200 pitches, and they get divided up almost automatically so this pitch goes to the health and science desk, this pitch goes to the religious desk. And so when we have those meetings, we have twice a week, we do pitch parties. That's what we call them. And we go through all the pitches, and then we reach out or reject or accept or form or, just somehow engage and connect with those folks who've submitted those pitches. But yeah, that happens all the time. I mean, and they're separate from those news meetings, but every desk has them at least twice a week.
Howard, do you want to talk about how, like, when pitches come in over the portal, you mentioned earlier, some are of course interdisciplinary. How do you figure out like who the right editor is, who the right desk is, or like, how do you kind of share?
Yeah. We get pitches from all over the world. So say somebody will send something from France, we send that back to France because that's their sort of story and the university is there. The topic, so if you're writing about health, that obviously goes right to the health desk. We send it over. If somehow it could be both, then the health editor and myself will chat about it and who wants to take it on, and we figure that out. But yeah, there's always a home for it, and we do a lot of connecting when it comes to those pitches. A lot of connecting.
Thanks, everyone. Well, thank you so much, UVA, for having us. Thank you to the panelists for all of your wonderful insights and time. It was so nice to chat with you all today. And thanks to everyone who attended.
Thanks so much. It was great to hear this conversation and just to hear all the insights from all the authors. It's obviously been an incredibly positive experience for them. And so thank you. And so thanks for spending the day with us. We really, really appreciate it. And I will make this recording available for faculty and I'll share it with all of you so you can share it out, and I'll include links in the recording as well. All right, have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Peace.
much.
Thanks, everyone.
Count cool out.